Great. So I think on my clock here, 4 minutes in, I think I'm looking at the participants. I think we might have a few more folks joining based on the invitation, but in the interest of time, I think I'd like to kick this off. And first of all, welcome you all, whether you are even East Coast later in the evening, or West Coast, or anywhere else in the world. Welcome, and thank you for joining, taking the time. I know there's a lot of video conferences these days, so appreciate you spending another 30 to 60 minutes with us here tonight. And I'm excited. I think it's a very, very broad, very exciting topic, digital foreign policy strategy from Switzerland. And really excited to have Benedict, our Consul General of Switzerland here in San Francisco, join us and talk about the topic, followed by a bunch of questions, which I will ask Benedict, and we will elaborate. And then we're a small forum. Feel free to put something in the chat, jump in, but we definitely want to make sure that in the end we open up and have time for additional questions. So without further ado, let me just hand over to Benedict.
Thank you, Philip. Everybody, nice meeting you. Hopefully one of the last events via screen, but I already put my suit on again, to try if they still fit. It did, so I was happy this morning. And I'll have prepared a few slides for you about the digital foreign policy strategy of Switzerland, which soon should appear on your screen. Yeah, there we go. I mean, one of the reasons also why I've been sent to San Francisco was my previous posting was in Denmark, and Denmark, as you probably know, was like the first country who really appointed a tech ambassador in San Francisco and developed also like the first digital foreign policy strategy as a nation state. We actually followed suit, and the good thing, I must say, with the Swiss approach, it takes sometimes a little bit longer, but we do it very thoroughly. And the now foreign minister, Ignacio Cassis, he launched a whole process of strategies and that are being now slowly implemented. You got also the links, I guess, for the documents, but just to brief, this strategy is based on a really broad analysis of the foreign policy interests of Switzerland in a report called AVIS 28. And AVIS is not the rental car company, but it's the short, the abbreviation for Außenpolitische Vision 2028. The minister said, we shouldn't look always just for one legislator, but a little bit more beyond in how would the world look like in 2028. And what do we need to adapt? And of course, they didn't know yet then about the pandemic, although that is also a little bit part of it as new upcoming challenges. But one definitely thing was there, it's the digitization. And that has been then one of the 4 pillars of the foreign policy strategy that has been elaborated for 2023. And now, based on that strategy, we have the digital foreign policy strategy, which you see in front of you with this scheme. And now, also in terms of personnel and organizational structures, there's a new division being set up in the foreign ministry in Bern, which will be equally important as we have a division for our relationships with the United States, with the UN, with Africa, with Asia. There will be a division of digitalization, which then actually also should mainstream this policy through all the activities of the foreign ministry, coming from our multilateral diplomacy at the UN, going to the security policy, but also into the development cooperation, which I will talk a little bit later. Jeffrey, if you could switch to the next slide. There are these 4 focus points: digital governance, cybersecurity, prosperity and sustainable development, and digital self-determination. Let me just elaborate a little bit on these 4 focus points, starting with the digital governance. For me, I'm always taking a little bit the example of what is happening today, and has there been anything like that in the past? And there's actually something which is in many ways comparable, although the situation is totally different. But we had 2 major innovations in communications and transportations, which were in the 19th century, the postal services and the railways. And these were both phenomena that had transporter effects. So there was a need to, find norms and rules and institutions that could govern this transporter relationships, these sort of international relations. And that was actually the birth also of the international organizations. One of the oldest and first international organizations, which is still based in Bern today, is the International Postal Union. And, funny enough, back then, one of the major tasks was also to ensure the postal secret. Because, earlier you had like nations powers, they were opening letters because they want to know what's inside. But like the principle that has to be stated was, okay, we need to make sure that the letters that go over the world are not going to be opened or checked by any other people. And, how much similar does that sound also to what we have today in the area of cybersecurity or privacy? Doesn't sound much different. Of course, it's a totally different technology. It's a totally different, also, I think, a problem or challenge in size and quality. But basically, in essence, it's similar. And the other thing is transportation, where you had actually now I see myself a little bit. I have to focus my Logitech camera. Well, I shouldn't move too much. That's the problem. Now I see myself sharp. I hope you see me too. With transportation, they had the trains, and they had to set up, they had a very basic problem that when the trains moved borders, they had to reconfigure the trains. So they had to find ways how to open the doors. Like if a French railway worker had to go into a Swiss train and open that train door in order so that he can reconnect the train wagons, they needed a key. Which was safe and sure. So they created, actually, it's called the Clé de Berne, which is still used today, which is a key where you can open doors of different wagons of different railway companies. So it was back then a tool which enabled the international cooperation. And that's something that we have to do in the world of internet, in the world of digital cooperation as well, that we find norms and rules that govern these technologies in a way that we can all take full advantage of it, and of course minimize also certain risks. So that's what we are trying to promote in the area of digital governance, and at the same time having a Swiss approach which has a smart regulation, a regulation that is not killing progress and innovation, but enabling it. There's one interesting example in Switzerland, which has actually been also a model a little bit worldwide, were the drones. I mean, Switzerland, as you know, is one of the leading countries still in the drone technology, and they had companies or universities that want to make these drones fly. But they said, okay, but we need some rules how we can do that, and that we get a permit to do that. So actually the BOTSL, the Federal Aviation Office in Switzerland, came up with a very smart, light regulation, which serves today still as an example worldwide to regulate the drones, which apparently, what people told me here also in California, they still haven't managed to do in the United States. and with the effect that actually it's more difficult to use drones in the US than in Switzerland. And I'll come to that a little bit later. Also, there the role of Geneva and all the international organizations and the UN is playing a very, very important role. Then the second point, cybersecurity, as we all know, I think it's so important that that we make sure that these technologies are safe, and that the people, also the users, the companies, are at ease using it, because otherwise we'll soon have a backlash, which will make us no longer available to use these technologies. And I think that is also an area where Switzerland is heavily investing, because we have a lot of knowledge in that area. And it's also, of course, in our own interest that cybersecurity is one of the main topics. And there again, Switzerland, with its reputation, can play a major role. And that's not something that we are saying alone, fortunately. There are also, like, when you probably heard of Brad Smith initiative with Microsoft, that he was, his initial plan was actually to elaborate a digital Geneva Convention, a little bit based on the model of the Red Cross, which was able to develop a certain standard of rules and norms, and also certain governance and institutions in order to enforce these rules, although not, of course, everywhere in the world, unfortunately, but still in a quite an interesting way. And that led then actually now to the creation of the Cyber Peace Institute in Geneva, which has become one of the major think tanks in the area of cybersecurity. And we are building on that. You may have heard also recently, we had an event with the Trust Valley Initiative, where different actors of universities, companies, but also public governments are coming together to promote the Geneva Lake area as a main hub for cybersecurity issues in the world. Then the third point, which is also very dear to us, is that we have to make these technologies also available for applications in the humanitarian sector, but also in the development cooperation. And today, as somebody mentioned also before, I mean, it's World Earth Day. I think we have to make sure that all these technologies also can make their contribution, and I'm convinced they can make a huge contribution to solve major problems and challenges today. And one of them is climate change, is sustainable development. How are we going to use and manage our water resources in the future? I think there's tremendous potential with the new technologies and big data and artificial intelligence to make that better. But we have to show also that these cases are really working, and that also we can enable developing countries to use technologies, and that we, as the sort of donor countries in the development cooperation, that we can also create these partnerships with private companies, which create a framework that we can collaborate and use that knowledge also for these cases. Then a last initiative also, which is very much promoted also by the former president and federal councillor Doris Leuthard, the digital self-determination. I think, again, it links very much into the cybersecurity issue, because I think if we don't manage to create the trust at the individual level, that, you know, I feel at ease sharing my data, and I know, okay, my data are stored in a safe place and I have access to that, and I sort of master my own environment in a certain sense, is very important. And I think that is also something where Switzerland can bring in a lot of expertise to sort of bridge this gap between the technology and the individuals. So Jeffrey, maybe to the next slide. The special features of our Swiss strategy in the digital foreign policy. One thing is really that we are convinced that data, digital tools, new technology have to be really cross-cutting through all fields of policy, business, society, that we have to anchor them into the human rights. And that's something. Otherwise, we're not going to be really able to reap all the benefits of these technologies. And I think it's. I see that. I mean, the foreign ministry is not necessarily a front runner in the digitization. But I think it's also for us in the future important that we can show that the foreign policy is actually engaging with these issues and is also developing tools and using its potential. Otherwise, we'll be sooner or later probably also overrun by other more relevant institutions. And I think that's certainly also a very important part of that strategy. Then again, the digital self-determination. And now I would like to the third point with the science. I think is also for us very important, and also the minister. He just recently appointed a new science diplomacy envoy. He's still ambassador now in the UK in London. Before he was our head of the representation at the UN in Geneva, and he is really also mandated to bring in the science into the foreign policy. And I think that the science also is so closely linked to the digital foreign policy, because I see that almost a little bit as twins. Because if you say you start with the technology, and the technologies, I mean, they come out of science, they come out of research. Once they are established as technologies, when they become tools, then we'll get into the digitization, that we can really use these new technologies. And then the third is, for me, it's like the 3 T's, is trust, so that you also have a political and social cultural environment that people are really using and these technologies and tools. So it's the whole process coming from technology to tools and trust, and that's where we need these 3 parts. And I think it's the science is also needed in order to be a credible actor in that foreign policy. We see that here in California, because we have academic institutions like ETH Zurich, EPFL Lausanne, but also many other universities that are on a top level. And that's why also they have the respect, and by engaging with them, we can also try to convince and work together with the tech industry, because we have also people who know what we're talking about and are at the forefront also of innovation and research. And again, now, I mean, the last point with the Swiss neutrality and our tradition of good offices is, I mean, the whole tech diplomacy or digital diplomacy has become a real part of sort of power play, international geopolitical developments. And it's I don't hope that we're coming back into a Cold War scenario, but it has become already quite antagonistic between whenever we talk about China or Russia in the area of technology. Yeah, it's either good or bad, and you have to take sides. And we as Switzerland, we always think it's better to talk to each other and try to build bridges where possible. You shouldn't be naive. You have to be also ready to confront certain issues if you see, well, there's really no will for a meaningful cooperation. But as we've seen also with China, for instance, with climate change, I mean, there are areas where they're ready to cooperate, and we should do that to the largest extent possible. Because also when we now look back again at some lessons learned about the pandemic, imagine if we would have a meaningful, trustworthy collaboration with China right from the beginning. Probably we wouldn't find ourselves, or we wouldn't have found ourselves in the situation that we were now the last year. So the next slide, coming a little bit closer to our home here. Why tech diplomacy, digital foreign policy here in San Francisco? There's a rich fabric of representations of countries here. More and more countries have also tech envoys or tech ambassadors, tech consul generals here. And, you know, basically it's, I mean, diplomacy or foreign policy is about safeguarding, promoting the interests of Switzerland, Swiss companies, Swiss citizens. And we are convinced that we do that at best when we work together with other countries, and that we work together in multilateral institutions. And whenever, I mean, foreign policy, in order to protect and promote interests, you have to have institutions or power centers that have an influence on Swiss companies or Swiss individual persons. And, you know, big tech companies, you are working in some of them, have today so much impact on our daily lives as an individual person, but as an employee or as a business owner or a scientist, that you're actually, you know, that's something that we have to get engaged. It's like, you know, when we have an embassy in Washington. And why is this embassy so big? Because they have a big influence on our foreign policy, on our economic well-being, and of the well-being of the planet. So, technically speaking, we're always there where there's power and where there's influence, and that is here in San Francisco, in the headquarters of many big companies. And it's different from, let's say, well, we could say we should also have an embassy, you know, in Vevey, where we have Nestle, but you could say, well, you know, Nestle is a very important company, but, you know, you still, at the end of the day, you have many other companies that in the same field that they influence your choice of what kind of yogurt you eat in the morning, or what kind of pet food you get for your dog or cat. But it doesn't have these far-reaching structural implications like the tech companies today. And, you know, when we're thinking about human rights, one of the most important human rights is the freedom of expression. And today, you know, not citing any individual persons, but if you're not allowed to Twitter anymore, you lose part of your possibility to express your opinion. And frankly speaking, that shouldn't be only the decision of a company to decide who can use these globally so important tools of communication, because otherwise your sort of human right is getting void in a way. And you know, we moved a lot, and with our family as well. And you know, it's like when you go to a new place, the first thing the kids always want that it works is the internet. All the rest, you know, it's less important. But if the Wi-Fi doesn't work, you have a bad atmosphere in the family. You probably had similar experiences as well. So yeah, this is a whole new field of diplomacy that we are developing. We have to develop new tools. We have to build up new networks. We have to do new diplomatic engineering with talking with states and companies. And you know, also a basic principle: if I want to build up relationship with a country, we go as an embassy to a country and say, okay, well, then we know in this ministry X, Y, Z, I find this, there's not a telephone book anymore, but I can see in the organigram who's doing what. And we have it's sort of open books, because these are established structures that we see in all the countries. But with tech companies, you know, they are sort of universes on their own where it's very hard or you have to really learn where are decisions being made, who is responsible, and has that influence there. And I mean, that's also something where we as diplomats are very interested in sort of building a relationship with our own sort of compatriots in these companies. When I can talk to Urs Hölzle in Google, that helps me understand how these companies are working, which I couldn't do by just reading the newspaper. Or we have people at Apple, and when I say we, it creates a little bit of a bond when you can call one of these persons and say, well, where are you from in Switzerland, blah blah blah. And if I would call an Irish or an Indian person, it creates a different relationship, and that's also for us really here a big capital. Yeah. So the next slide. Jeffrey, I won't dig in too much into that because I just realized actually I touched already on a few things. Denmark, the importance of the big tech companies, and I mean, Microsoft also for us, for instance, is an important example of a company that, because also maybe it's already a little bit more mature, and of course they have had some experience in the past already, which made them aware that it's important to governments, or at least they can have some influence on their own business model, and that they should engage in some dialogue and discussion with them. And so that's actually also where we did specific events together, which brings me actually to the next slide. Some specific examples of what we have done here in the last now almost 2 years that I'm here, which showcases a little bit the specific examples of what this tech diplomacy then is really at the end. Like when I learned an interesting expression recently on a Zoom call where somebody was saying, when the rubber hits the road, so that's a little bit our rubber hitting the road, is when we present the Trust Valley here in Silicon Valley, it's one, of course, to showcase also the expertise that there is in Switzerland in the area of cybersecurity. It's also a way to show American companies, if they want to set up maybe a structure in Europe, not only in Europe, but also for Switzerland, might be a good place to go to. And that luckily also, thanks to the good work of the Swiss Business Hub and Switzerland Global Enterprise, is more and more seen. I mean, we had also recently, you have certainly heard about it, that Palantir opened an office in Switzerland. And actually also, I mean, Google was probably the front runner of that, but also Facebook and Microsoft, they're expanding their footprint in Switzerland. And so it is also part of and a bit of nation branding, showcasing the different advantages of Switzerland in that area. But also being the place where we want to discuss the governance, the rules of the games of the future in these technologies. And I mean, there's no secret, when you as a country can influence the shaping of the norms of the future, you always get a sort of a competitive advantage. Because of course you're setting the standards, and the standards that you are trying to set are the ones that most of your companies or researchers or are actually already sort of following. And by extending them on a global level, of course, it creates a much better global playing field. The other concrete example that we had is the Geneva Talks UN 75. That was last year when the UN actually celebrated its 75th birthday. And it's a nice link to San Francisco because the UN Charter was signed here in San Francisco. And to build that bridge now between Geneva and the UN, and there we had this talk with Brad Smith, which also then, I mean, behind the screens also led to a closer cooperation on cybersecurity issues between us here as the consulate, also Swissnex, of course, with Microsoft on these issues. And then also, we also try what I said before about this mainstreaming in a way is that we try to show also applications of Swiss technology in maybe not so obvious fields, like this wine and tech webinar we had, where we showed the potential of drones in the vineyards, or big data in the vineyards, which was also a very successful event. And to sum up with the last slide, Jeffrey, I really see, International Geneva as being our sort of USP here in the Bay Area. Because, I mean, look, the Danes, for instance, they are promoting themselves in a way also as a sort of a bridge builder for the NATO alliance, the European countries here in San Francisco. But for us, International Geneva is where we can be sort of their ambassadors. And that, that is ranging from WHO in the area of health, ITU, and many other important organizations that have a real big interest in these new technologies. And I think that's also one of the main sectors that we will invest our energy in the next 2 to 3 years, to really set Geneva and Switzerland here as the main hub for digital diplomacy, then also on the global scale. Yeah, with that, I would like give back to you, Philippe.
Yeah, no, that's great, Benedict. Thank you so much. It's really encouraging to see how it's anchored in a bigger foreign policy strategy, the breadth that you've touched on so many topics, but then also some very tangible examples, right? What's happening here. So thank you for sharing that. So I have a few questions, and then I'd love to open up, and people feel free to chat or then speak up. The first one is, like I mentioned, the 4 focus points you highlighted, right? I think it shows a real breadth of topics. What do you think is the most important thing for Switzerland to get right?
Well, I think if we can be a leader in showing a way to the digital self-determination, I think then we're making a really huge contribution in a sustainable future of using these technologies in a sensible way. And then the other thing I'm personally convinced is also that we have to show how technology and the companies here, and they're actually, I mean, also extremely interested. I mean, like Google, the CEO on sustainability, and I know Urs Hölzle also, who has such a profound commitment also for the planet and green economy and everything. And that's something also where we have to work together and use all that potential, because then, people are also getting more confidence in technologies if they can see, well, it's not just a dating app or some nice feature. It's really, it's helping also the world as a whole. And and the other thing is really, I mean, Geneva for us is, we're a relatively small state. But our influence on the world stage is actually really through the Geneva and the UN in Geneva, and we have to make sure also that the UN is really fit for the task of the digital age. And they're also doing big efforts, but they're not yet there where they should be to stay relevant.
Great, thank you. Maybe just picking up a follow-up question on the point of Geneva. Obviously, we have a big strength here, right, of what we have in Geneva already. But maybe it's a bit of provocative questions, right? To be relevant and be providing thought leadership in digitization and technology, right? You need the ecosystem around you, right? When I look at Europe, what Macron is doing, where Paris is heading, what gets launched, and you look at a few other hubs, right? So how are you thinking, what else is required, or what are we doing, right, to position Geneva with the ecosystem needed to really drive that global thought leadership that is, or we want to aim for?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when you look here, you need the science, the good universities, you know, and I mean, I have no shame to say that the Swiss universities are on the level of Stanford and Berkeley. I mean, that's something we have, and that's also something, it's not easy, you have to keep it. And, you know, that's the openness. We need the agreements of the European Union, that we have the free movement of persons. Look at, I mean, they're not so good because they're only Swiss students or Swiss professors. I mean, 60% in some parts of the universities are foreigners, and that's good. That's our strength. I know that's what the US the last few years maybe had a little bit of a problem, because they were closing down on that openness in a way. And then, you know, we have good workforce, we have good talents. We have the international view. I think what's really missing is, you know, we need more sort of capital and companies that are willing to invest and take risks. And that's something, you know, which is so great here, and that are willing to scale up. You know, in Switzerland, the company, if they have 10, 15 people, they think, wow, great, you know, or if you have 50 people, whoa, now we're getting big. So, I mean, that sort of will to think bigger and be bolder, get a little bit more of that mentality from here to Switzerland. I think that would make the critical difference and make it even better than it already is.
Great. Maybe sticking with that theme of how can we get to that future state? What other big gaps do you see, whether that is soft or hard stuff, right, to really get to the future state you laid out where we want to be?
No, but yeah, I think it's still I mean, when you look at the pandemic, you know, we need more trustful, good international cooperation, that the companies know what are the rule of the games worldwide, and which gives trust, and also which makes it accountable and foreseeable is where they can invest, so they can know, you know, when you see now what in Europe is going on with regulation on artificial intelligence. I think we need to have consensus in the society and on the policy level. What do we want really to do with AI, and what is AI? And I think that's also something where there needs to be a lot more, I think, education or skilling, that we get familiar. I mean, it's like I take often also the example of the robots. I mean, there was always big fear of robots because they thought they would replace you as a human being. But now I think, you know, with robotics, we're at a stage where we see, you know, robots is a little bit like our iPhone or our bicycle. It's a tool. And if you can show somebody, you know, a watchmaker in Switzerland, that you have a little robot, a Yumi, which helps you do certain things easier, then it's good. Then you have this acceptance also of the technology. And I think that is something that we also have to invest more.
Great. Maybe looking a little bit, you mentioned Denmark, you have experience internationally. What can you give maybe a few examples? What are other nations doing where you would say they have really done something in one area that is kind of innovative or leading in this space?
Yeah. Well, I think starting with the Danes, what they really managed well is to really mainstream digitization, the whole society and the economy and in the politics, and also having a broad consensus on many topics, because they have this way of bringing everybody together, the trade unions, the employer associations, environmental organizations, areas. So that's I think something which they did extremely well. They have a high support of new technologies in the population. But also, they developed also that trust, because they say, okay, well, we share our data with in the health sector because we know the state is taken care of and the state is your friend, which here or in other countries it's not always the same. Then, I mean, what's probably also interesting examples are Australia and New Zealand, which are also very successful in sort of getting this digital mindset in the government. They have units that they are close to the prime minister, that are pushing that agenda. And then, yeah, I think France also, it's good because they take a little bit of lead and are visionary. Sometimes you can say, well, they have too many visions and not enough capabilities. But I think that's the strength of Europe. We're diverse, and if Germany and France are together working on issues, it's great. And I mean, we have that as well in Switzerland with the rather French-speaking approach or the German-speaking approach, and so I think basically also the diversity is very important. And I think also where we do a good job in Switzerland is that we bring these technologies also down to the work level. And I think that's, again, it's very important that we keep and develop and improve the professional training system, the Berufslehre, because they have to get also digital. They have to be able to use these technologies, and then we're really strong, because at the end of the day, you still need some people who can manufacture something and do something, and that's what you need these people for. I think there we're really strong, and that we see also why a lot of American companies are going to Switzerland, because you still have this workforce there, which makes an incredible good job in that area.
Okay, great. Maybe one last question, and then I'd love to open up. You mentioned the importance of the public-private partnerships, right, and the exchange between the corporations, governments. A lot of folks on the phone, on the video call here have a connection to Switzerland or might have a Swiss passport, work in the US. What are some recommendations else you can give us? What can we do, right?
Yeah, I think, on the one hand, you're all sort of Swiss ambassadors also in the Silicon Valley. I mean, you bring also your luggage, your rucksack, as we say in German, and I think you bring also that spirit here, and I've met also some of them that are now coming at a certain point of their career where they think, hey, I'd like to bring something to Switzerland, and be in many different ways, be it teaching or looking also at startups or doing advisory work. And also, I mean, that's something I try to do more. We started already a little bit, but due to the pandemic, we couldn't really connect more also on a personal level. But I think that we, and I don't say that as a Swiss national, but everybody who feels has some attachment to Switzerland, I think it's great if we come more together and share our views and ideas. Can somebody who just worked in Switzerland for a few years, or studied in, or made something else in Switzerland, or has worked for an international organization in Switzerland, that we come together more here and exchange ideas of where we could bring in our strength.
Awesome. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to open up and yeah, any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Karin.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Benedict. Great to see you.
Karin.
Thanks for this. This was really interesting. I have a question related to the point that you made about how important data is. When you were talking about sort of the Swiss kind of principles, and one thing that I think is top of mind for many of us right now that work in companies that serve both European customers and US customers is the developments that we're seeing with Schrems and especially the Schrems II decision of the European Court of Justice. And even though it's sort of a legal decision, but at the end of the day, it's sort of rooted in the fundamental political tension between the US and Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I will be, and it could have pretty dramatic consequences. I think a lot of people don't really yet understand what the decision really says and the impact it could have on US companies. I'm just curious, from a Swiss perspective, and sort of being in a neutral position between that tension between those two powerhouses. What's your perspective on that, and how is there a path to overcome that through political means?
No, well, I mean, Switzerland for us, that, I mean, international law for us is a lifeline. I mean, otherwise we cannot work in the world if we are sort of have to switch between powerhouses all the time. And I think that's again where we have in Geneva, where we have to try to find some mechanism where there's dialogue and where we can, expose these two cultures to each other and learn from each other and come up then with maybe compromises or innovative solutions that at least it doesn't, we will always be different, but that these differences are not counterproductive. And I also believe somehow that should be, I mean, a little bit of a competition of systems or ideas. That, I mean, with the GDPR, the Americans said, well, actually, the Europeans, you did better. So more and more, this becomes the standard. Now with drone technology, apparently the Swiss had a good idea, and the drone regulations is finding its way in the world. So but there has to be a sort of a forum where this competition is really taking place and where we really have exchange. That we have, I met a Swiss student who was at Berkeley doing his master on legislating AI. I mean, that's the same thing. We have to find some understanding how we can have rules and norms that we can use AI in the future, and that there's not a European AI and an American AI and a Chinese AI. And I think that's the challenge. And frankly, yeah, I think there's no better place in the world that we should start these discussions and bring these people together in Geneva. And that's, people saying, that's not us only saying, that's people like Brad Smith saying that it is he sees that as the place where this can happen. And that's what we should try and trying to bridge these cultures so that it doesn't getting into a sort of a system, a war of systems where we'll all lose out together.
Great. I think Philip had a question as well.
Yeah. Hey, Benedict. Thanks very much for sharing all your thoughts. Karin, for the group, great question. Mine was actually similar, but now I switched it to a different one around ecosystem. So I go a little bit through a frustrating stage. For those of you who don't know, I run a venture firm, early venture firm, and I've been investing in Switzerland and US. And what I realize is Switzerland does a lot for building up the ecosystem around it, on all components of it. Around legal help, I think we're actually doing really well now in Switzerland, but also around scale up funding. So not just early stage, but actually scale up funding and so on. We do actually, I just saw this recent report, we also do extremely well around foreign founders who actually come to Switzerland to start their companies and incorporate. We don't do so well about making it easy for them to stay. But those are all kind of questions around ecosystem. My question to you is like what you heard in the last, or let's say since you arrived in Silicon Valley, what do you think we as a community or ambassadors here could help with? What are the real key things we need to nail, kind of to build on Philip's question around the ecosystem? Like if you give us a priority on what to work on, I'd just love to know that.
But I think, you know, to bring some of the Swiss values to the Silicon Valley, and that sounds a little bit maybe pretentious, but that's also, I met an American recently who told me, who works a lot with Swiss clients, and he says, you know, if I have a phone call with a Swiss guy, after an hour or two, we're ready and we work, and it works. So when I have the same discussion with my American clients, oh, endless talks and nobody, it's sort of, you know, this reliability, commitment, be serious. You know, I think that's something which is here. I hear often is really highly appreciated. I think, well, that as a Swiss, we're probably not the only ones, but I even heard that when I was in Denmark, you know, that we have this, and really also the long-term view, you know, they say, hey, we are not here just to make a quick profit. We want to invest, we want to build long-term relationships. And I think that's also what I feel is, you know, when you talk about Switzerland here in the US, how things have evolved, what kind of dialogue structures that we have, and also I think the inclusion, you know, and that again, I'm coming back to the Berufslehre, the professional training system, education system, which is very high in demand here. You know, there's California, Utah, others, Colorado are building up such a system. I think that's also something we can bring into, which is also a great tool for integration, because you can it makes the society and economy more inclusive. So I think that's also something we can try. And you know, sometimes also I hear that, oh, I didn't know that he was Swiss, and it's not about bragging, but you know, so you know, lift up your flag a little bit, and I think that already helps a lot.
What about, quick follow-up, what about us in Switzerland? So not just here in Silicon Valley, but many of us travel back and forth, and I personally, I'm very active in Switzerland to twist the things that I think are not working. So what about us in Switzerland, coming back as the Silicon Valley people?
Yeah. You know, I think there are two things. I mean, that's really about culture also, and attitude, that you know, that you allow yourself to make mistakes, that you can fail and start again, and that you have that you're more courage and that you're bolder, think bigger. You know, that's what we see now also, the difference with buying vaccines between Europe and the United States. You know, they say, okay, we'll throw billions at all these companies. Maybe half of it won't work, but if half of it works, it's great. And we were trying to make contracts. Well, what happens if it doesn't work? Oh, what happens if you're too late? Blah, blah, you know, and that. So that's also where you see, you know, that's the advantage of the American spirit.
Yeah, maybe a quick comment might be interesting for others too, but my frustration, how I started with, is we have a few companies that are Swiss companies, they're excellent, they're in a high growth stage now, And so I get blamed often by folks in Switzerland saying, well, but you're kind of a US VC, you're Swiss. Okay, that's fine. But like, let the Swiss growth investors invest in those. So I go to those, and then the term sheets we see are kind of exactly what you're saying, Benedict, like small thinking, right? Like they have very low valuations compared to a US VC, not because US is like just spending too much on valuations or going too high, but the rationale sometimes is, well, but if this goes wrong and that goes wrong and this goes wrong, then the valuation will be that low. I'm like, yes, but you shouldn't plan for the downside all the time. But I think it has just to do with a little bit our mentality. Yeah. And we need to let people like kind of free up from that a little bit to think bigger. I think your point is an excellent one, Benedict.
Thank you.
Great. I think we have 1 minute left. I think we want to stop on time. If anyone has a urgent question or wants to raise it, please do so. Otherwise, I will close here. I think, thank you so much, Benedict. Thank you, everyone else, for the participation. Happy to take this further, follow up. I think we have we will maybe share some of the content. Jeffrey will find a way. I think we have the email addresses and find ways how to engage going forward. Maybe one small advertisement. I think we have an event coming up, the San Francisco chapter here in May. Just a heads up, I think this is with Rich Gunn from BPM, a small consulting firm who's really active in assisting business owners from startup planning through succession planning, and especially around exit strategies. So we're going to talk about how to increase and create more company value. So that's coming up in May. So with that, thank you all. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.